Hi everyone, thank you so much for visiting my virtual presentation today here at Virtual CIES. My name is Charlotte Wright and I'm a Master's of Education candidate studying International Educational Development at Teachers College. And the title of my presentation is More Than a Solitary Noun, a framework for defining play in early childhood education. And in this presentation, I'll walk through a tool that I've created called the Explanatory Rubric for Play in Early Childhood and explain how I came up with it and then the different tiers to this rubric. Before I jump in to explain how I designed the ERPEC, I want you all to understand a bit about my personal background and my motivation for this work. So prior to returning to studies at Teachers College, I had been an early childhood educator for nearly a decade. And during my time teaching, I saw a decrease of play, not only in classrooms, but also in neighborhoods and homes. And I was noticing more and more this overall misunderstanding about play and lack of understanding of how important it is. I saw more and more educators and parents thinking that play was a frivolous activity. So I wanted to come back to school to study how I could bring more understanding of play's importance to the general public. So I didn't know it then, but what I was witnessing was symptoms of a schoolification epidemic, and please forgive me if you already know what this term means, but for those of you who haven't heard it before, it essentially means that these accountability and standards and the academic rigor that comes with it in primary grades is trickling down into early childhood classrooms, and we see this more and more as there's been this proliferation of formalized early education around the world. So this means more academics and less play in early childhood classrooms. And this is alarming for all of us who know how vital play is for a child's optimal learning and development, and also for the advancement of society as a whole. Not only is play important for a child, according to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, children also have the right to play. But what is play really? So we know it's so important to how children learn and develop. We know that children have the right to play. But when you really stop and think about what it is, can you put it into words? It's hard to do, isn't it? Play is one of those words, one of those concepts, a lot like love, that you know it when you see it, but it's intangible. It's so difficult to define, especially to define precisely. And when I first started doing my literature review, I realized that it wasn't just me or my fellow educators who had difficulty defining play in a precise or uniform way. So I'm putting up just a few play definitions here, not for you to read them. Please don't feel like you have to take the time to read them, but just to show you that although all of these definitions are valid and are taken from play scholars and early childhood scholars, people who know play deeply, all of these definitions are different and in at least some way. And many of them are verbose. They're describing play in great length. So the rationale for this work is that in order to defend play, we must first know what we mean when we say play. And the first step in that is that the early childhood field must have a clear and uniform language structure to speak about the myriad ways that play can present itself in the lives of young children. So over a year ago now, I set out to see if there was a way that I could create this clear and uniform language structure for talking about play that would be rooted in all the research and scholarship on play in early childhood that already exists. So my first overall research question was, how is play in early childhood defined in the literature? I quickly noticed that play is often categorized in the literature based off of indicators of child freedom. So I explored the question, how is play categorized in the literature, focusing on the constructs of the role of the adult, the role of the child, the motivation source, and the material source. I also noticed that there are so many different types of play in the literature, and I wanted to see how those could connect to domains of learning and development. And lastly, I noticed that social interaction was frequently discussed in play definitions, so I wanted to further explore that as well. So to create the ERPEC, I engaged in cycles of literature review about play and play in early childhood specifically. And I designed the ERPEC in different iterations. So after the first design, I went back to the literature, made sure everything that was present in the ERPEC could be supported by the literature, and also added to it. And it was an iterative process. I improved the ERPEC, and I read more, and I improved it again. And then a few months ago, when I felt like I had a solid version, I reached out to trusted early childhood stakeholders, both practitioners and scholars, to receive their feedback. And then I updated the ERPEC accordingly. So the ERPEC is essentially a tool that describes a taxonomy for naming and defining play experiences with more precision, while still honoring the nuances of each unique play experience. So I'm not sharing the ERPEC itself with you all today. It's too much text for a presentation. But what I'm going to do is walk through each tier of the ERPEC's taxonomic system here and explain the ERPEC formula, which you see in an image on the top of the screen here, and how we can use all of that to give each play experience its own name and own definition. So first, we have to talk about the overarching definition of play. The overarching definition of play in early childhood acts as the foundation for the ERPEC. And to create this overarching definition, I sought to be as inclusive as possible of all the definitions of play in early childhood that are already existing in the literature. So the words and phrases that you see bolded here were the words and phrases that I found most frequently in my research. Once a play experience fits under the overarching definition of play in early childhood, then one can move to the first tier, which is play categories, which addresses how much agency a child has during a play experience. So the play categories tier on the ERPEC was inspired by all these existing play continuums and play scales that I found in the literature. So like these continuums, the play categories on the ERPEC also operate on a continuum from left to right according to child agency. But what makes the ERPEC's play categories a bit different is on the ERPEC itself, it delineates how adult role, child role, materials, and motivation impact how much agency a child has during a play experience. I've included both free play and guided play as play categories, as these are two well-researched and well-established play categories that are often present on these existing play continuums. I've added two other play categories, spontaneous play and structured play, to address other levels of child agency that I found are important in the literature. For the lack of time, I can't go into too much detail about why I added these two categories or why I believe they're important, but again, please reach out to me if you'd like to learn more. The second tier on the ERPEC relates to play domains. So play domains address what the child is doing and or learning while they play. So these are the 8 play domains that are explained on the ERPEC. So you may be thinking that these look a lot like content areas, and this was purposeful. So the thought behind it is that naming them according to what the child is actually doing or learning makes the potential learning and development outcome explicitly clear. This will be helpful when trying to make these connections and also when trying to increase buy-in from people who may think that play is a frivolous activity. And I'm not going to go through this, but I wanted to put this here to show you all that this was a thoughtful process, naming these play domains. I looked at prominent play types in the literature and thought about how they were connected to developmental domains, learning domains, as well as multiple intelligences. The third and final tier on the ERPEC is the social interaction distinctions of play, which addresses who the child is playing with during a play experience. And within the social interaction distinctions of play, there are 2 sub-distinctions, age and group size. So age addresses Vygotsky's work. So this idea that in order to access their zone of proximal development and learn and grow further, a child must receive guidance from a more experienced or older peer or an adult. So that would be important to include. And then group size relates to Mildred Parton's work and her social stages of play. However, these distinctions do not operate in stages. They don't suggest that younger children should be engaging mostly in solitary play. Older children should be collaborating in group play. There's no value ascribed to any of these distinctions. So now we have time to walk through just one example of how we'd use this ERPEC formula and the contents on the ERPEC, the 3 tiers, to name an experience. So we're going to walk through a scenario together. Let's work through this example. A group of 3 children, all of different ages, are making mud bricks outside, and they use these mud bricks as well as rocks and sticks to create a house-like structure with no adults around. So how can we use the ERPEC to give this play experience its own name and own corresponding definition? So we know that it's a group of children and they're all different ages. So that's this social interaction piece. And so we can term that mixed age group play. The play category is spontaneous. We know they're outside using natural materials and there are no adults around. And then for play domain, they are using natural materials and transforming them to build something. So we can call it both science and engineering, science and environmental play, as well as engineering play. And then someone can see that name and use the ERPEC to know exactly what that name means. So my hope is that the ERPEC and its corresponding taxonomic system can be this shared language, this uniform and clear language structure to talk about play that we can use in both research and practice to find more evidence across the board for all these different ways that play can materialize. And with that, there will be more value ascribed to play. So the people who right now may think that play is just a frivolous, childish activity, there'll be more buy-in, they'll see the value to it. And ultimately, my hope is that this will allow for more play in the lives of children. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this virtual presentation today. If you'd like to learn more, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to see the actual rubric itself, the ERPEC itself, please don't hesitate to contact me via this email. If you'd like to find out more information, more details on the ERPEC, please visit erpecplay.com. Thank you very much.